All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you guys for joining. We are right at 12:30. So, Harriet, how was the I know I saw you guys recently sponsored the color purple.
We
How
did.
was that?
It was phenomenal. It was phenomenal. So the Workshop Theater of South Carolina, a cultural arts group here that Jeffrey actually sits on the board, they're putting on a production of The Color Purple, Alice Walker's The Color Purple. So it started running January 21st and it goes up to February 6th. Every night has been sold out. Jeffrey and I were the marquee sponsors for that event. And so for this entire run. And so we got to see the show ourselves on this past Friday. And it was phenomenal. Every act, every scene, the costumes, the screen, the song selection, the musicians in the orchestra pit, phenomenal. So if you are out there and you get a chance, there may be some limited tickets left. Show goes until February the 6th, the Workshop Theater of South Carolina in Columbia. Check it out. You will not be disappointed.
Absolutely awesome. And it's always good to I think for people to try something different that they don't know, because most people don't normally go to a play,
Right?
but it is, I think, good to get out there to support people that are expressing their artistic energy. So yeah. Uh
So
so
you and Lola,
congratulations on that.
you and Lola mark February 6th off. We think we're gonna go back to the final show. That's on the 6th, it's on a Sunday. So I'll hit y'all
Okay.
up. So check your calendar. Okay.
Okay. All
Yep.
right. We'll definitely do that. We'll definitely do that. So how's everything going in your firm?
The firm is going well. January, this last day of January, and the first month of the year has been super productive.
Mhm.
I thought it was going to be slow. It was the exact opposite. We have been booked, busy, booming, and productive. So we pray that the remainder of the year goes this way, and we can allot some time for rest. But it's been a good month. How are you? How's business? How's life?
Good, good. Business has been good. It's been, thank God we have definitely seen some increase. I would say in the past, what, 2.5, 3 months,
Mhm.
we've literally just doubled the number of clients that we have.
Yeah, thank God for
Uh,
that. Have you doubled
so
staff capacity? You got more staff to handle the overflow.
Well, so we did, it's one of those things, like, we knew that growth was coming. So we kind
Okay,
of got staff in place
got it.
beforehand. And that's always one of those interesting things when you're running a business
Hmm.
where it's just like, hey, all right, I don't have the work for them to do right this second, but I'm gonna hire the staff because I know the work is coming in, to where now you don't have that pressure of like, okay, all right, there's more than enough money coming in to pay these people salary.
Right. It sounds like strategic planning and faith. Faith is the essence of things hoped for, evidence of things not seen. So by faith, you hired new staff because you had done a strategic plan and you knew that the work was coming. But it's better to have the workers trained and believe God that we're gonna meet payroll until the money gets
Yes.
here. Then either one, I can't take on new clients because I don't have capacity, or they're in here but I can't pay them. So you made a faith move with your business and you paying off.
Absolutely, yeah. It is definitely paying off. I mean, we were. I mean, in some respects, we made sure we were strategic. To say, okay, we got to have at least 1 month's worth of
Right.
expenses in the
Yep.
bank,
Yep.
and
Absolutely.
then let's, like, turn the speed on. And like I said, the good thing is now, that there's more work,
Yep.
and we're continuing to grow. So that was good. And then also a big thing, which I think this one is very, very important to churches. So if you're tuning in, please pay attention to what I'm about to say. February 1st is the deadline to have 1099s filed. So if you have paid contractors, you brought in repairmen or repairwomen, you brought in people that have done some different services, the security, if you have your musicians that are on contract, or if you had guest speakers come in, your 1099s that you need to file with the IRS are due tomorrow. So there are a couple of clients that I'm cranking through between today and tomorrow by 5 p.m. to get them done. But yes, churches, if you have paid anyone more than $600 for some type of service within your church, the 1099s are due tomorrow by 5 p.m. So please, please, please get those in. I mean, for organizations that don't get them in, there could be a IRS penalty for the ones that you don't get in. So please do what you need to do to get those in.
Y'all listen to Terrell. I'm one of Terrell's clients, and Terrell been threatening me. Not threatening, kindly reminding me, Harry. He even sent me an email. It's Harry. I need 1099s on these people. Give me some W. Was it W4s, W-9s.
W-9s.
W-9s. I got about 4 more people to hit up, but I'm getting together. Y'all listen to Terrell. So I'll have to pay the IRS penalty. Yes.
I was on the phone with your husband this morning, like,
Oh God,
hey.
I know he got some. So y'all, I don't just push Terrell on y'all. We use him for our own businesses. He knows what he's talking about, and he keeps us out of trouble. Financially solvent. Yes, he does.
Yeah. So today and tomorrow will be a busy day of just really helping people, get things in line. And I think also, as we talk about each week, like the topics that we bring up are, one is to keep people out of that, hey, deadline is tomorrow, we got to rush and get this done. But a lot of the things that you and I are talking about are just helping people get the processes in place so that when they come up to deadlines or when it comes to different decisions that need to be made, it's like you're already ready for those things. And it's that saying that, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. So one of the areas that we've alluded to, or we've mentioned a couple times in the past 2 weeks, is talking about a board and the board of directors. And a question that a lot of churches that I have asked, is, as a church organization, the 501c3 non-for-profit, like, do I really need a board, or can I just have, the senior pastor and one other person make decisions? What, from your experience of working with churches, when they ask the question of, do we really need a board, what has been your perspective on that?
So my immediate answer to that question is always going to be yes. You need a board, right? And so then, because do I have to have one? So let me tell you, when a church absolutely must have a board. If your church is 501c3 tax exempt with the IRS, then the IRS requires all nonprofit organizations to have a board of directors. That's a requirement. Now, why am I specifying? There are a lot of churches operating out here. They don't have 501c3 status, right? So if your church is just up and y'all going and you don't have 501c3 status, must you have a board? Not legally, but should you have one anyway? You should. Okay. I think that every church should have a board. The churches that must have a board are the churches that have been deemed tax exempt by the IRS. So that's the short answer. Yes, you should have a board. No church should be able to make decisions unilaterally by the pastor, right? Whatever he feels. And it's a whole lot that comes in with that. Maybe your pastor's honest. I hope he is. Maybe he's not. But everybody needs checks and balances, right? No man is an island. Even Jesus with his omniscient self, knowing everything, he had a group of people around him who were business savvy and this, that, and the third. And he was God. So that would be the only person who in the ministry, I would say, no, he don't need no board. Even he had a crew of people that helped him do ministry. You need a board. You do. And I have 7 reasons why you need a board, but I'm going to start at the top. Yes, you should have a board. And if you are tax exempt, you must have a board. Okay.
Gotcha. I mean, that's an interesting point that I want to make sure I hit on. That one is about the 501c3 status, because I think that sometimes people don't realize that the 501c3 status, that tax exempt status, meaning that if people are donating and giving to your organization, that they can write it off on their taxes as a deduction. That sometimes I think people just think that, oh, churches automatically get that. Like, if you start a church, it's automatically. And I've had to tell some people, like, no, that's not automatic. There are, that's something that your organization has to file for. So if you are a church and you have not filed the paperwork to be a 501c3, then you need to let the people who are giving to your ministry or to your organization, they need to know that. Because if they're giving and they're expecting to be able to write it off on their taxes, I mean, they need to understand that, hey, we aren't a 501c3. Your giving to this organization doesn't apply for that. And so I think it's best for people to understand that, hey, just because you're a church does not, or any non-for-profit, it does not automatically make you tax exempt. And if you're not tax exempt, there are some things you need to keep in mind. So, and I know you've probably done some of these where you've helped people file for the tax exempt status. Like, how much effort does it take for them to file it? Like, what does that process look like?
So to gain tax exempt status, you have to file with the IRS. If you're a church, you can't do the short form. But I mean, I'm going to say it's not hard, but I'm also an attorney, right? So it's not hard if you know, you got to understand, or you can hire somebody else to do it for you. But you need to get some organizational documents. You need to be registered within your state, your Secretary of State's office as a nonprofit entity. You need to have an EIN number. You need to have a mission, a charitable purpose. So there are steps that you have to take. You need to have a board together. On the board, usually, I think at least 3 people, no less than 3 people. They can't all be related, and if they are, you got to have your conflict policies. You need your bylaws, your articles of amendment, your conflict of interest policies. So there are steps that are required. But I want to touch on something else, Terrell. One benefit of being non-exempt from a church is tax write-offs for people who donate money. But there are some benefits to the churches themselves. One, if you are a non-exempt entity and your church owns property, you don't have to pay taxes. You don't have to pay real estate taxes and some of the other things that you have to know. You still have to pay like payroll taxes and stuff like that if you have people on salary and stuff like that. But there are benefits to this thing. There's money that's specifically designated and earmarked for nonprofit organizations, and so you can take advantage of those grants and things of that nature if you are properly established. So to the ministries who are not set up as a nonprofit, it was good to tell them, so it's not automatic. I formed a church, I have tax exempt status. You must apply. You must get approved. And then once you do that, you must follow the IRS guidelines. And that's where a lot of churches get messed up, because a lot of money can change hands between churches. And if you're not properly set up, if there's no oversight, if you're not handling it correctly, it could be a problem for you, whether you have tax exempt status or not. But you should have it. And especially if I'm giving to your church, please send me my statement and I can write off on my taxes. And I give money to a lot of ministries. But one requirement is, if I'm giving real money here, please send me my letter saying that I gave X amount and y'all are a tax exempt organization. Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think, that one cannot be understated. So, I mean, as you talked about, if you're a 501c3, you have to have a board. If you're not a 501c3, it is highly I mean, there aren't any legal requirements in general. Now, maybe you're in a state or something where your state may require something unique. You need to understand what that is depending on where you are. But in general, there aren't a legal or a tax requirement for you to have a board if you're a nonprofit. But it is highly, highly recommended. So, speaking of the board, what does a board for a church, what would a board do? What are some of kind of the responsibilities that people would expect from a board?
I'm going to give you my top 7 church board responsibilities, and then we can come back and dive into them. The first one is to ensure legal compliance, right? So to me, that's one of the most important reasons of a board, to ensure that your church and your ministry is operating within the confines of the law of whatever state that you're sitting in. And we just talked a little bit about that with the nonprofit, but are we operating correctly? The second, financial oversight. Is your church responsible stewards over the church resources? And is the church maintaining accountability and solvency? Okay, so legal compliance, financial oversight. 3, strategic planning. This is one of my favorites. Strategic planning. Your board should be able to articulate your church's mission and make sure that the church is developing strategy to plan and grow and accomplish the mission that we say that we're doing. And we're not just getting together every week, having a good service and going home, and people's lives aren't getting better, the church isn't growing, and we aren't taking over territory for the kingdom. Another one, 4th reason, churches should manage performance. Performance of who? The people that you pay to be there. Your pastor, associate pastors, church leaders, musicians. We are managing performance. We're running it like a business. Church is a business. It might be a nonprofit, but still a business, and kingdom is a multi-billion-dollar business. So your board should be able to manage performance, that the people who are getting paid out of this ministry are doing what we pay them to do. All right. With that, some pastors gonna hate this. The next, your church should manage compensation. Manage compensation. Okay. Church leaders get compensation, right? The board should recommend pay and housing allowance, approving salaries of senior leadership. Your pastor should not just say, I want to raise, pay me. Put my wife on staff, pay her X amount of money. Don't even just say it. Just do it. You can't have that. You can't have that. So managing compensation, monitoring conflict of interest. A lot of times when we go to church, We are family members. We are married. We small churches where everybody out here first, second cousins, twice removed, right? And so if we're making money here, there's a conflict. There could be a conflict because if my daddy's on the board and I am the musician, I am the pastor, and daddy's saying she gets an extra $1,000 a week. Based on what? Are we playing more services? No, that's my daughter. Or no, that's my spouse. And I'm tired of giving them money every month. So I'm gonna give them that. That's just some of the things, right? We need a successor. Well, my grandson gonna be the successor pastor. Has he been called to the ministry? Has he studied? So you need a conflict of interest policy so that the board can ensure that things are on the up and up. And seventh, maintaining supporting documentations and board records and minutes. Nonprofits have a lot of freedom and leeway. But if you ever step in to get audited or the IRS calls on you to see what's going on, or not as third-party banks or whatever's going on, you need to have records of that. We are meeting. These are the things that we are discussing. We are voting on them. We are approving them. We're not just in here randomly flying by the seat of our pants doing what we want to do. So legal compliance, financial oversight, strategic planning, managing performance, managing compensation, monitoring conflict of interest, maintaining supporting documents and board records. That's why you need a board. Now we can dive into whatever you want to dive into. But that's
Okay, awesome. And now I want to give a quick promo for the group, the church law and finance on Facebook. So one of the benefits of being in the group is someone submitted a question last week where they had a question about like what financial documents do we need to keep, and went in the group, we answered the question. And one of the things that we will start doing is when we share different stuff like what Harriet just shared, is really just posting that list in the group. So if you're in the group, like if you didn't catch everything that Harriet just said, in the group, what we're going to do is we're going to have a post where we list out those 7 reasons why you need a board. That will be a post in the group. Now, the only way you're going to see it is if you are in the group on Facebook. So definitely join the group in Facebook, so you can see those recaps of the key things that we talk about. Now, I do want to dive a little bit more into that. So, as you list, those responsibilities. So from the financial oversight, well, actually, let's start with the legal oversight. From the legal oversight, so from your board, does that mean that you'll need like lawyers on your board, or like what level of expertise would they need to have in the legal area to be on the board?
So here's the thing with that. Do you need a lawyer to sit on your board? No. I'm from a small country place south of South Carolina. I'm probably one of the first attorneys out of my community. There were no lawyers on my church's board back home. Shout out to Jerusalem United Methodist Church. There were no, but however, we had people on the board to see where maybe we need to call in an attorney to reference this matter or get oversight if we are confused on something. You know what I mean? So you don't have to be an attorney, but you need to have people on this board smart enough to know when we might need to call one, right? And we might need to refer this issue to one or make sure we're operating correctly. That makes sense. So you don't have to know everything. You need to know who to call if there's a certain issue, but you need to have enough insight to say, hey, I think we should get a lawyer to look at this matter. You know what I mean? As a church, we might need some outside help on this one. There are churches, I sit on church boards. I sit on a couple of church boards. So there are churches who, when they're starting up their boards, they ask me to take a seat, because if I'm sitting on the board, then you're going to get free legal advice, and you don't have to call necessarily to get the questions answered that I can answer while I'm sitting there. Right. And so it just depends on where you're at. So do you have to have an attorney? No. But you need to have somebody on the board, a student enough to recognize if there's a legal issue that we should get some legal guidance on.
Awesome. And I would say, I mean, on the finance side, I mean, I would say the same thing on finance. Is you don't need a CPA to sit on your board. Now, if you have one, that's great.
Right.
But what
resources in your ministry too. If there are people in your church who are there and willing to share their times, talent, and resources with the ministry, then reach out to them. But if you don't have them in your congregation, that's okay too.
And one of the things that I've told some organizations is, like, even if, let's say, the people that you have on the board, and that person doesn't have a legal expertise or finance expertise, maybe one of the things is their task is to develop a relationship with someone who does have that. So there are some people who sit on boards of different non-for-profit organizations that when they do have questions that come up, they reach out to me because they're like, they all they needed was access to someone who can help address the question. So sometimes when you're on a board, you may be the traffic controller of the question. You may not be the person who has to do the research, but as long as you have access to people or access to the information that could address it, I mean, because as Harriet said, if you're a small church, you probably won't have the luxury of having people with specialties in every area. Like, you probably aren't going to have a person who has specialty in mortgages and insurance and legal, but you do need someone that can get access to the answers and the information so that that information can come back to the team. Now, something else you mentioned about is with the compensation. So when it comes down to the board, and this becomes an area of contention for that I've seen with a lot of churches where pastors or ministers feel like, the work that I'm doing, I should be paid more. But when the board is, involved in that process, I from my experience, what I've seen, and I'm curious as yours, is the board helps make the process of deciding on what compensation is less emotional and
Right.
more objective. What
That's
have
right.
you seen in that situation?
The same. I've seen it the same, unless the pastor has handpicked his board to yes men who only do what he tells them to do because they have meetings before the meetings. Let's be real, that happens, right? But a good board, right? A good board who's taking their responsibilities seriously, they should make an objective determination. They should base it on a couple of things: size of the church, okay? What's our budget? And the budget just doesn't go to numbers, because you could be a small church with huge numbers, or you could be a large church with small numbers, but can we afford it? What are we asking them to do, right? Compensation studies. What are similar pastors getting paid for similar sized churches with similar budgets? It should be based on facts, not, oh, he a good dude, give him some more money, right? And your pastor could be a good dude, and pastors work hard. So I am pro, if that man or woman is working, pay them what they're worth within your budgets, within reason that can be justified. You know what I mean? But it shouldn't be, it's like any job. You can go to your boss and say, hey, I think I deserve a pay raise for X amount of reasons. I've done this, I'm doing this, I'm growing it here, I'm saving here. I think that's justifiable. Give me a 20, 30% increase. But it's justifiable, and you can't just make the decision by yourselves. I think a lot of times when we get into these non-denominational churches, where
Mhm.
we're forming the churches on our own and we're doing our own thing, a lot of times sometimes we don't have the oversight that we need. Because here you go, if I'm a pastor and I say I'm starting this church and I'm gonna get a
Mhm.
board because I gotta have one because I'm gonna get non-exempt status, but these people are not going to tell me what I can and can't do. Because let's be real, that's a lot of times that happens. But you
Mhm.
need that oversight. So hopefully, prayerfully, your board are reasonable people who want to see you eat, right? We just want it to make sense for the church. And so a good board should objectively, like you said, objectively look at the compensation and pay them, what they're worth within your budget. And I also feel like a pastor should have benchmarks. You should not just get money because you come here every Sunday. Your
Mhm.
contract, we talked about contracts last week. I don't know if I put in here performance goals, right?
Yeah.
Is the ministry growing? Are we eliminating debt? You know what I'm saying? Are we hitting certain benchmarks with outreach? Those things deserve rewards. Because if you came in here, I got a good friend in Atlanta, and he was at a small church. They sent him to a small church, and the church when he got there had 30 members. Okay, 30 members when he got there, and he only was there 2 years. By the time he left in 2 years, the church had gone from 30 members to 500 members,
Wow.
right? And so he grew that church in 2 years' time, so much so that the denomination took him from the church that they started with 30, he grew to 500, and they placed him at a church that had 7,000 members. My man was working. You know what I'm saying? And so tangibly, I can see the growth. So yes, he should not get the same salary on 30 members that he had after he had brought it to 500. But he done the work. You can see the board talked about it. He was so good that he got a promotion to this. The whole thing. If you do good with a little bit, the Lord will give you more. He went from 30
Yeah.
members to 7,000, and I think he's grown to 7,000 and 10,000 in a pandemic. You know what I'm saying? So you should have benchmarks and ways to justify. Yeah, this course is more work now. You need more money.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. And one of the things I'll also mention, I do think the board plays a role in protecting the pastor and the pastor's family. I mean, from the standpoint of if you, as a board, you're objectively looking at it and you're saying, okay, based on what we're asking this person to do, here's what what a pastor would normally get paid to do these things. And let's say your church can't afford to pay that, then as a board, you can look at it and say, okay, all right, these are all the things we're asking him to do. We can't afford to fairly compensate this person for this. So the board can then decide what responsibilities will we pull off of their plate.
That's it.
Because I do believe that, yes, it is a calling, but sometimes, some pastors can get really burnt out because they're doing so much,
Too much.
where they're doing all of this stuff to keep the church alive, and they got to go take 2 part-time jobs just so they can put food on their table, to where sometimes the board does need to step in and say, okay, all right, how do we take some of the work off of your plate so that it aligns with what we're compensating you with? Because if we know we can't pay you very well and you're going to have to get a part-time job to be able to put food on your table, I shouldn't be asking you to do what a full-time pastor does.
Pastor duties. I totally agree with that.
Mhm.
I totally agree with that. And that's, it's to be fair. So if you do it correctly, it can be a benefit to the church and to that pastor. Right?
Mhm.
I agree. And pastors, speak up. If this is what y'all paying, then like I said, then take these 12 responsibilities off my plate because I'm going to work someplace else. But I'll still be
Mhm.
here. That's only
Yes.
fair. But these are
Mhm.
discussions that should be had amongst your board. Right? And
Mhm.
something else I want to say about boards, I see a lot of churches where the pastors sit on the board. Right? But in most structures, senior executives report to the board, and they rarely have a seat at the table to make decisions with the board. Is that what you see typically? Right? So I see a lot of that. But in
Yeah,
churches
I've seen
area,
I've seen that. Or like if a senior executive is on the board, their vote isn't any greater
they can't.
than
Right?
the
That's true.
other people. Yeah, usually a lot of times what I've seen is I guess you say the senior executives that actually work in the organization, like they're working in the day to day, they may not necessarily be the chairman of the board. Like I sit on the board for Lander University's foundation. And so the leader of our board is not also an employee of the foundation.
Right.
Whereas when we have those board meetings, he meets with, I'm one of the people that are on the executive committee. So when he meets with us, he discusses, gives us an update, and I guess you say the chair of the board is not also an employee. So there becomes that level of oversight. So
Mhm.
we can kind of weigh in on different things that are going on, as
Yeah.
well as, there have been some times where we've had to weigh in and be like, hey, I understand that you want to do this, but hey, here's where your compensation is. We can't, we cannot reasonably ask you to do these extra things if we can't afford to compensate you more. So that's unreal. So it's to protect the people who give
Mhm.
and the organization, as well as to protect the leaders from burning out, because I think it becomes a mutually respected relationship.
Right. That's right. And
Mhm.
it helps with, we didn't delve deep into conflict of interest, but you just have to be careful. These are some of the things that you have to be careful with. So you're on the board, you're running the day to day, you have a vote, then sometimes you may have to recuse yourself if the vote is about, you're on the board and the vote is about whether or not you should get a raise. Well, we know you're going to vote for yourself. Recuse yourself, speak up, whatever, but we don't need that included in here. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
just some food for
Gotcha.
thought.
Gotcha. Yeah,
And
and
Terrell
I
and I
think
share these things. I'm just going to plug this. If you have questions about your board, your church board, what's right, what's wrong, or what's what, feel free to reach out to myself. I do this, and I won't necessarily charge you if the question is a simple yes or no. I can point you in the right direction because we don't know
Mhm.
what we don't know.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I do think that the discussion on conflict of interest, I think, is a broader one that I think we should probably do a
Show.
separate session diving
Mhm.
into conflict of interest, because I do think when it spans for, you got your smaller churches where there are going to be a lot of related parties doing different stuff in the church and different in the organization. And there are different things that you can do as a church to actually make sure that conflict of interest doesn't become a problem. And then when you get into some bigger organizations, you have a little bit more of a luxury to where you can avoid some of those conflict of interest because you have so many people and you can divide the responsibility. But I do think that topic is probably worth diving into a little bit more.
Absolutely, I agree.
Mhm.
I agree.
Awesome. Well, one of the things that I always want to reiterate to people is that our goal is not necessarily to put restrictions on you as a church, as an organization, but it's really to enlighten you to the responsibilities, to some of the different factors, some of the different insights that you can implement in your organization to help it run smoothly. Because I think having a board in place, it does take some effort and it does take some work to have a board in place. But one of the things that I have seen is it is better for you to do the work and have the board in place than to run into an issue and not have a board. So it is definitely better to do the work on the front end. So um Harriet, was there anything you wanted to share on why a church needs a board before we wrap up for today?
I'll just say this: an effective board can really, really help your ministry to grow and help you really accomplish your mission. We are here trying to save souls and transform people's life in Christ so they can have the abundant life that Christ promised all of us. When your business is straight, it makes it easier for your church to handle your mission. Your pastor's out here bringing the word of God. Your finances are straight, so we are paying off things that we own, and we are helping. We have more money to put into the community and resources to help the people. That's what you want your ministry to do. So an effective board is making sure that the business of the church is together. Really, really helps the church be much more successful. The churches that I see do ministry well. Their business of their church runs like a well-oiled machine. And a lot of that starts with your board, making sure we have the right people, the right policies. Our church is heading in the right direction. So I'll say this: if you have a board, you're new to this, you heard some things that's new today. I need to get nonprofit status. I need to file for that. I have a board. I don't know if our board is operating correctly. One thing that I do is I come in and I do board training, right? And I'm gonna talk to Terrell and say, hey, I can give the legal side of this. Once you come in and explain the financial side, we want to help. We are here to help. So if you're trying to get this thing together and you kind of don't know where to go, reach out to us. Let us see if we can help.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll say the final thing that I'll say is for pastors, because sometimes putting a board in place for some pastors seems a bit scary and a bit overwhelming, especially if you're the one that started the church. And one of the things that I always remind them is that it is a mutually beneficial relationship, because if you're a pastor and you have a board, although you report updates and stuff to the board, as a pastor, you still can also make requests of the board, meaning like, hey, here's what we're trying to do in the organization. As board members, you can ask for their help to help the organization move closer to that goal, because they're not just there to just, boss you around, tell you what to do.
Exactly.
They're there to actually help the organization achieve the mission. So if you're a pastor, a minister, is don't forget that you can use your board as a resource to help the organization. So make sure that you're letting them know, hey, here's what we're trying to do, and here's where you can help as well. So make sure you understand the mutual beneficial relationship between the leadership and the board of your church and your organization.
That's a major key.
Yes. Well, definitely, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. Definitely we will be back next week. So Mondays at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And as I start getting messages from people in different time zones, I remember I gotta say the actual time zone. So 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And thank you guys so much for tuning in.